That's of fundamental importance. The idea is there, it's being demonstrated, and the money and the finance sector is following where the future is going. So yes, we have passed the tipping point in terms of understanding and ideas and net zero and the growth story. We've passed the tipping point in terms of governments and regulators with the network on greening the financial system. We've passed the tipping point in terms of technology and cost. We've passed the tipping point in terms of new investment. And indeed, the markets have been recognizing this for some time. But don't get swamped in over-optimism. We have got such a long way to go. We're very close to those tipping points, and we've got a long journey, and we've got a journey where we have to start very fast because this decade is absolutely decisive. The world's infrastructure will double in the next 15 or 20 years. We'll have the same amount of infrastructure added as we have already got. If what we add looks anything like what we already have, then say goodbye to 3 degrees, let alone 2 degrees, and it would be absolutely catastrophic. So when I say that we passed the tipping point, and I've tried to marshal the evidence across the board to suggest that we are past that tipping point in the whole financial and investment story, that should not be interpreted as blind optimism. We've just passed it. We've got a very long way to go, but we have a sprint, a middle distance, and a marathon. And we have to move very fast in this decade if we're to get where we want to go. So passing a tipping point and getting the job done are very different. Passing a tipping point is a precondition. Yes, we're on the way. But this decade is crucial for the future of us all. And we have to invest in the many trillions in this decade, in our infrastructure, in our new ways of doing things, in new ways. We're going to need more investment, and it's going to be different investment. We're on the way, but we have to move much, much faster than we're moving now. So acceleration is not the same as velocity. Acceleration means picking up velocity, but we're nowhere near the speed of action and the scale of action that we need.
Well, thank you very much, Lord Stern. Since the publication of this landmark report, which are your reflections on how the governments have not really fully grasped your recommendations in it, well, to put it mildly?
I think governments are hesitant about major change. And what we are arguing for here, and what we must do, it's an imperative, is change radically. We have to go from well over 50 billion tons CO2 equivalent of emissions a year now, right down to net zero in 30 years. And if we're to have a decent chance of 1.5, we have to halve it this decade. That means we have to change, and we have to change very quickly. And I think governments are understandably hesitant about rapid major change. I think now, finally, there's an understanding that we have to do it. But still, we need a much stronger commitment to actually getting it done. But I think it's the fear of radical change and the management of radical change. And that's why it's so important to see the opportunities in this new way of doing things. It's cheaper, it's cleaner, it's healthier, and it's going to be a much better way of living. And it's that positive argument on the returns to change and how valuable those changes are that I think is going to take us along the way. But we still have to press and accelerate. And I think we look particularly to our younger people to help us do the pressing.
Which are the main obstacles from a financial perspective that needs to be addressed, and really by whom, to unleash the power of money to meet the Paris Agreement?
First, you have to shine the spotlight on the bad and show just how destructive the bad is and how risky the bad is. So we have to stop doing lots of things like investing in fossil fuels. And I think the arguments that I set out are not secret. You know, that returns to investment in fossil fuels are very bad, and they're very bad for the reason that they're the technologies of the last century, not the next. So that's the first thing that you have to do. But there's a bigger positive story, looking at what you do have to do, looking at the opportunities in the new investment. And there, policies that will allow those investments to come through, carbon pricing, getting rid of fossil fuel subsidies, organising infrastructure investment so that the investors can have steady returns over the long term, and the right kind of finance in the right place at the right time for managing risk. And there, I think that coalitions of financial institutions sharing risk and working to reduce risks, and development banking, I think, is going to be very important. Both national development banks and the international development banks. India's setting up a development finance corporation. We're setting up a national infrastructure bank in the UK, and the multilateral development banks are moving strongly to align themselves with Paris. It's about reducing, managing, and sharing risk. It can get quite technical, but it's really important.
So, what are your hopes for the outcome of COP26 from a financing the race to zero perspective?
I hope that we have two kinds of clear commitment, that the financial institutions of the world, private and public both, commit themselves strongly to net zero, to the measurement of progress towards net zero, and to milestones along the way, particularly in the next 5 or 10 years. So I think that will be a crucial part of the story. I think the multilateral development banks who are committing will need to be clear that they have the support of their shareholders. It's one thing that the shareholders saying, yes, we'd like you to get on with this climate change stuff. It's another for the shareholders to give them support in terms of the scale of resources that they need. So I'm hoping that along with the multilateral development banks, committing as they will, that the shareholders of the countries who are at the COP will recognize that those banks will need the support. So those are the kinds of things that we should look for. I do think it's moving well. I do think the commitment to net zero is there. What we need also is some commitment to the practicalities and the policies and the resources that are necessary to do that. They don't have to promise it all at the same time, but a recognition that over time those resources into the financial institutions, particularly the multilateral development banks, are going to be very important, and it's going to be the shareholders of those institutions, the countries, that are going to have to lead the way.
What can and should the UK and also the co-host Italian governments do to get other governments on board?
I think they're working very hard to do exactly that. The UK is very strongly committed, and I'm working very closely with them. But I'm from the London School of Economics. I'm an academic. I'm a friend of the COP, and working very closely with my friend Alok Sharma, who I think is doing a great job as the president designate of the COP. So the first thing is that the commitment from the UK is very strong. We see it as an opportunity, of course, for the UK to play its role in the world, but also the duty of the UK to do that. I think the spirit must be collaborative. I've been to all the COPs since 2006. There are many people who've been to more COPs than me, but I've been to a lot. And the collaborative spirit is absolutely key. In the past, and those of us who were at Copenhagen in 2009 remember this very well, there was fractiousness between rich countries and poor countries. And I think it's very important that the rich countries of the world, as they say we must all recognize net zero, and as the poorer countries say we must all recognize net zero, that the rich countries at the same time recognize that with finance and technology, they're going to need to be helped